Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this sunny-ish sort of day. So this is the Supporting and Identifying Vulnerable Customers in Collections webinar. So thank you for joining us today. We've got a packed agenda today. We did have Gareth from Christians Against Poverty, who was going to be joining us today, but unfortunately due to sickness, he's no longer able to present. But luckily for us, we had a huge amount of other speakers, so we've just managed to fill up that time for you guys to get the benefit of today. So today we've got Chris Fitch from the talking about the FCA guidance. We've got Josh Hopkins from SLL Capital, Kevin Still from Breathing Space, Mark McElvanney from IE Hub, and Helen Pettifer from Helen Pettifer Training, as well as our very own Helen Lord from the Vulnerability Registration Service. Just a little bit of background on me. I'm today's chair. My name is Kirsty Brookman. I've been with the Vulnerability Registration Service for the last 9 months, after previously working for CIFAS Leaders in Fraud Prevention for the last 9 years. So my background is obviously in fraud prevention. So I started sort of my journey within administration, moved through training, compliance, consumer experience, and finished in consumer protection after I was made redundant in March of last year. The Vulnerability Registration Service picked up one of CIFAS's projects, the Protecting the Vulnerable Service, which my colleague Helen will go into in more details. But after the service was taken out to tender, the VRS successfully managed to take on that contract. And with that, they also took me on as well.
Okay, morning everybody. Can you just tell me if my screen sharing, Kirsty? And
Yep, we can see it.
And not my last family quiz or anything, which might be more entertaining for you all. But so lovely to see so many of you attending today, and really grateful to the speakers. I just think it emphasises the importance of vulnerability to all of us at the moment. I'm going to really not spend too much time, but run through, because there are so many people there, run through exactly what VRS does at a high level, and give you a few updates around where we've got to and what we're doing at the moment. But obviously, anybody got any questions, or if anybody wants to get in touch for more details, please do so. We'd be delighted to talk to everybody and get feedback and information. So VRS, Vulnerability Registration Service, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We've been going for about 5 years now. It's a data sharing model. It gets traction the more people that are using it and the more people that are providing us with data. And that has snowballed certainly over the last 12 months, partly as a result of the pandemic, I think, partly because of various regulator focus on what we're doing. But what we're really trying to do is to enable consumers the opportunity to highlight to organisations the fact that they are vulnerable at a high level, trying to give them a single point of contact so that they don't have to repeat their circumstances multiple different times to all their service providers when they're already suffering from a difficult situation. And we do that really by getting information directly from the individual, typically on a consensual basis at a very high level. We never wanted to go into granular detail about vulnerability for lots of different reasons, because there's so many definitions of it. Everybody's completely different. We didn't want to sit on a database populated with really sensitive data, but we thought the fact that somebody's vulnerable is a trigger for an organisation to enable them to know and to start to treat them appropriately. It's a dynamic database in the sense that once we're told that somebody is no longer vulnerable, that information comes off. Some people will stay on there permanently. Some people may only be recorded on there for a brief period of time. And where we get our information from is either through an individual self-registering. So I can register myself, I can put my hand up, and I can say I'm vulnerable. And I think that's powerful in itself. I think it's a brave thing to actually be able to sort of actually go out and state that fact. Or we can get information from third parties who are authorised to act on an individual's behalf. So that may be whereby I've got a power of attorney and I can register that individual and we will validate that power of attorney. We work with councils, solicitors, estate management companies. We hold court of protection orders. So whereby somebody's in a position where they haven't got the mental capacity to manage their own finances and somebody's managing on their behalf, we hold that information as well. And we'll alert those organisations if an application is made in an individual's name, i.e. it shouldn't be made, or its potential fraud indicator. And we're gradually working with more and more councils. So I think in the last week, we're working with 3 councils getting their court of protection data on board. And Kirsty alluded to this earlier. We had an agreement with CIFAS last year where they collated this data from some of the local authorities. They felt it sort of deviated a little bit from their main fraud focus, and it fitted with our vulnerability objectives. So we've taken that over from them. And then the other way we get data is working with organisations, working with service providers. And if they have a relationship with an individual, they can load information on their behalf where there is a legal basis to do so. So we have a growing database, increasingly growing. Everybody on there has been identified as vulnerable, so it is potentially relevant to any service provider that they work with. We see vulnerability relevant across all sectors. So if you have a relationship, if somebody's in a position where they're vulnerable, it may be relevant to any of their service providers, and that can range from utilities to pensions to insurance to financial services, government, health. I mean, a huge range of it. They're only vulnerable once, but it can apply 20, 30 different times. We started off, as I say, with a very high level of vulnerability, and we did that deliberately. There was huge amounts of discussions and have been ongoing since we started about what is vulnerability, how do we define it? And we thought, right, the fact that somebody is vulnerable in itself merits a little bit of special attention, a little bit of fast tracking. Most organisations have some form of vulnerability function, and these people should probably be pushed through to them. In some instances, people will say they need to be declined financial services, and I think an example of that probably just goes back to what I was saying about councils, where there's a court of protection order in place, but a lot of people just want their applications referred and their situation taken into consideration. So we broke the VRS definitions down a little bit, and those are what's on the screen in front of you. Again, I still see those as high level because everybody's different. Everybody's vulnerability will apply and manifest itself in different ways. But we saw this as an additional pointer for organisations, and also gives organisations to map across from our definitions to their own definitions of vulnerability where they have them. And that might be where utilities have their own PSR codes. It may be a major bank who have their own definitions, but typically these cover off the high level definitions. And we've put accessibility in there because we think that's important in terms of digital communication. We've also put coronavirus in, obviously massive impact upon a huge amount of people. So we've developed that database to be as agile and adaptable as possible, so we can work with organisations, we can work with platform providers to start to get the information out to as many end users as possible. And again, regardless of sector. So I think, for example, we've got Synectic Solutions probably on the call today. I believe Russell's around. We work with them to try and get the information out as far as possible and as easily as possible for the end users. It's API technology, it's straightforward. We want to work in collaboration with as many companies as possible. If the way we operate doesn't exactly work in the way that an organisation wants to use the information, then we can talk to them and we can work that out and identify how we can adapt and work with them more easily. I've mentioned there as an example, we've been working in terms of allowing councils to access our data when they're dealing with council tax arrears. We've just been doing some very, very successful work with Ascendant Solutions, who work with numerous local authorities, trying to help them with their council tax arrears. And what we found, and specifically I'd use Walsall as an example we've recently worked with. So out of 6,500 council tax arrears cases, that was whittled down, working with Ascendant, where they identified serious financial difficulties. We've then overlaid what we've got on our database around genuinely vulnerable individuals, and that then sort of whittles down to a small number of cases where people are genuinely in a vulnerable situation on top of their extreme vulnerable, their financial difficulties. And what that's allowed Walsall to do is work to deal with those cases in a specific and targeted and focused way. And some of those cases, had they been picked up earlier, would have probably prevented somebody falling into serious destitution. So the value of the data is there if it's used in the right way, extremely valuable. Also mentioned breathing space, debt resilience scheme. People that are far more briefed on that will come and speak to you about that a little later on. I know Chris is going to talk about the Financial Conduct Authority's guidance, which we wholly and fully welcome. I think that's very, very important. And I think we will try and work with that and help organisations meet the expectations of the FCA as far as possible. I think the only couple of things that I would say about that, there is a lot of focus upon modelling, upon identifying characteristics of vulnerability. And I mean, those of you that know me, I have a very heavy credit reference agency background. I know the power of modelling, and it's fantastic. And I think there's a lot that we can do. I would just say the thing that we're trying to do with VRS, we have identified people who have put their hand up and said, yes, they are genuinely vulnerable. It's not an assumption. It's as much of a fact as you can possibly get. So those people are vulnerable. I think the thing that we can't do is make predictions about how somebody's going to fall into vulnerability unless they've actually told us that, or unless somebody's told that when they're working on their behalf. So we don't know who's going to fall into a situation where they've got a mental health issue. We don't know what the real impact of a physical illness is. We don't know if somebody is likely to suffer a bereavement, and we don't know how much that's going to impact them or how long that's going to affect them. We all have our different frailties, we all have our different strengths, and people are affected in different ways. So I think the power of what we are trying to do with VRS is to really give those people a voice to say, yes, we are vulnerable, and please take this into consideration and perhaps treat me in an appropriate way once I've got through to you. So that's all from me. Anybody's got any questions, please let me know. And again, I would say if you want to talk to us about what we do and how you can access the information that we hold, please do so. It can be accessed on a transactional basis. We can enable you to run a customer base against our database on a batch run to identify any vulnerability with existing customers. And we also have the ability to alert you if one of your customers becomes vulnerable, or indeed if somebody's on the vulnerability registration service and they remove themselves, or if they amend that data in any way. Okay, so thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Helen. We will be doing questions for Helen at the end of today's session today, hopefully around the 12:20 mark. But if we can get Chris to join us now. Chris, have you got a presentation today?
I have, Kirsty. Handily enough, yes. Let me just pop up. Just tell me when it appears on the screen.
Yes, we can see it. All good.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Well, thanks very much, Kirsty and Helen, for asking me to come along. I'm joined today by my colleague Ian Phillips, so I'm sure we'll have a few things to say as well. So I just wanted to start this by just getting you to focus on this question, and I'm going to come back to this question in about 13-14 minutes time. And that question is, which needs could you meet today for your disabled or vulnerable customers? So if you're a firm, what could you do immediately for your disabled or vulnerable customers? And if you're not a firm, what would you expect could be done today for your disabled or vulnerable customers? And we're going to come back to that. So what I want to do today is, if I can just move the slides on. They've just frozen. So what I want to do today is talk about the FCA guidance, but I'm going to talk about it in a very specific angle, which I think is relevant to VRS. And I'm going to try and get us think twice about disclosure. So if you have come along thinking that's not what I expected, that's not what I want, and that's not what I need, then you can get the FCA talking about their guidance on our Vulnerability Matters podcast. You can go to Money Advice Trust and read our white paper, or you can send me hate mail at bristol.ac.uk, or you could just drop me a line and tell me what you're up to on vulnerability. But I am going to focus on disclosure this morning. Now, there are many aspects of the guidance. I'm going to have that focus on disclosure, but I'm going to say how they relate to each of these boxes on here. But I'm going to focus in on that one in the top right-hand corner, customer service. And if you've read FG21, which I'm sure you have, there was a big emphasis on it, on setting up systems and processes that support and enable vulnerable consumers to disclose their needs. And it's a very short sentence, but I want us to try and unpack that a little bit today. Because disclosure is where something private and quite personal is shared about someone. It's a real moment of opportunity to get an insight into need, to grasp what that customer requires, and to change and adjust provision where relevant to the business model. But there's also a risk from a firm perspective that we can miss it. But there's also a risk on the customer side as well, as they weigh up whether to disclose or not. And disclosures really come through the ranks. We've seen in the various versions of the FCA guidance on the right-hand side, we've gone for a very minimal kind of mention in GC19, which came out in July 2020 or 2019, of course. More in GC20, but a real crystallization. It's come to the forefront about disclosure. And it's important because if we look back at some of the studies that we've done at Bristol and the Money Advice Trust, the study you can see there is the number of disclosures made to frontline staff each year, physical and mental health and bereavement. And there's one there for the debt advice sector, which is mental health disclosures each year. We can see that actually disclosure does take place quite a lot. However, we know from research from Mind, and this dates me a bit, I was involved in this back in 2008, that 2 out of 3 customers who had mental health problems would not disclose to a creditor. So we're trying to think here about how do we actually encourage disclosure? How do we have those processes and systems that the FCA is talking about? So what I want to do today is look at 3 things. I'm going to draw on some research that we're doing at the moment. So it's a bit like going to one of those preview shows by stand-up comedians. Occasionally I'll lose my track of my train of thought. I'll lose my track. Maybe this doesn't quite work, but this is work in progress that I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to look at the decision to disclose. I'm going to look at the types of disclosure that are made, and I'm going to look at the disclosure environment. How can we create mechanisms, processes, ways in which we encourage people to disclose, to put their trust in us, to take that moment of risk and opportunity and use it for best outcomes for everyone. So I'm going to look at what it means. I'm going to draw on some qualitative research with customers, staff and leadership. It's debt collection staff that I talked to, about 34 in total, split half and half between those with lived experience and those working in frontline positions or in leadership positions in debt collection firms. And it's focused around mental health, but I think the lessons are there across vulnerability. So I want to look at the decision, first of all, to disclose. And here's another question for you. Would you tell a creditor, your bank, maybe an organization that you have a commercial relationship with, would you tell them something sensitive and personal? And at this point, you're probably, checking your phone and thinking, well, that depends, Chris. It's all contextual. And of course, you're absolutely correct. It does depend. But actually, what we have to do is not just stop our thinking at that point, but to unpack, what do we mean? What are the barriers? And what are the facilitators to disclosure of a vulnerable situation? So I'm taking from the research here, and I'm going to show you some of the data from the customer side of things. And what you can see here is there's a number of things which act as barriers to customers disclosing. And they range from the customer's personal attitude to disclosure, consequences perceived, their state of mind and health at the time, their knowledge about whether actually they are able to disclose, the staff actions that are taken, which could encourage that disclosure or perhaps block it, and their experience of disclosure previously, both with your firm and with others, and the attitudes of others in relation to mental health. So kind of how mental health is viewed and with a judgment. So it's going to show you some data just very quickly. And what I'm trying to do here, I can't show you all the data set. I'm just trying to drop some seeds in here. And the first seed is let's unpack disclosure. And the second seed is let's think about some of the barriers to this, because if we're going to encourage it, we need to overcome those barriers. So here's some of the data. I'll just pop up. So this here is consequence. So this is someone with experience of being in debt, in contact with collections companies who've got mental health problems. And there's a real heightened sense. This was one of the highest reported worries or barriers. It's the worry that it's going to be on your file. And every time you ask an organization for something, they're always going to circle back to that particular disclosure of vulnerability. Well, you have mental health problems, or if you needed a mortgage or something. And whether that perception is correct or not, that strongly exists amongst some consumer groups in vulnerable situations. So we have to bear that in mind. We have to think about, and this is something I'm going to come back to time and time again, the signals. We often think about disclosure as a one-way street. They will tell us something, and then we will go on and take relevant action. However, disclosure is a two-way street. We need to be sending signals out to actually reassure people that their perceived fears or their worries, the barriers that are in place to disclosure, actually are unfounded. And we'll come on to some of that at the end. So I just wanted to kind of plant that seed with you about barriers. There's a second one here about knowledge, and it plays into that signals element that I was talking about, the signals we send out to encourage people to disclose, to reassure them. Some of the people in our sample that we interviewed didn't even think that a creditor or an organization would want to know about their vulnerable situation. And we might be sitting here thinking, hang on a second, vulnerability is top of the register, it's top of the agenda. Actually, for consumers in their lives, they don't know what FG21 is. They've never heard of the Vulnerability Registration Service, although they will do in the future, I'm sure, as it grows and grows and grows. They're actually trying to deal with their stuff. So we need to send strong signals out. So there are some of the barriers. I'm just going to show you, there's another one here as well. And this was about previous experience of disclosure. And this is really important. And this is about the industry as a whole and the sector as a whole, as well as our individual firm. Our experience of disclosing can impact the next disclosure. It could be to our firm a bit later on, or to another firm. This person here is saying, actually, when I disclosed first time, the firm didn't seem to care. So I suppose I didn't tell them about it the second time, this second set of circumstances, because it made little difference the first time. So we just need to bear that in mind. I'm going to talk quickly just about facilitators. And facilitators are things that encourage disclosure. And one of the key ones that came out from the piece of work was actually staff taking steps to probe and encourage disclosure themselves. And you can see in the FCA guidance that there is an indication. There was a little bit doubt about proactive chasing of a disclosure or proactive encouragement, but actually say where there's clear indicators, we should go on to kind of probe. And this person here just saying, actually, the staff member did ask me. They picked up on something, they did ask, and it really made a difference for that individual. So this is all important, because if we don't unpack disclosure, and we don't understand the barriers to it and the facilitators to it, it means we can't send out the signals to reassure and explain how we're going to handle that disclosure, how we might use their information, how it might make a positive difference for them, whilst allaying their fears about some of the negative consequences, which actually may never come into fruition. So that was the first seed, really, I wanted to plant with you. The second seed is types. Now, this is Darwin's finches. The Darwin, when he was on the Galapagos, where Beagle 2, looked at the finch. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk 15 minutes about finches. Fear not. But what the key point I'm trying to make here is, just what Darwin found, there was a common ancestor, a common root, but there were kind of multiple varieties of finches that evolved with different aspects. You can see different beaks and head shapes and sizes that evolved over time. And it's exactly the same with vulnerability. Just as every finch is not the same, although it has a common root, not every disclosure is the same. We really need to understand this, because again, if we're designing systems, policies, protocols, ways to encourage disclosure, we need to actually understand the different types. So in the research that we're looking at the moment, there's a number. I'm just going to show you a little bit of data. You can see some of the types on the site. People accidentally disclose. I don't know if it's ever happened to anyone when you're talking to a customer and something slips out. That is quite common. But I'm just going to pick up on a couple there. And I'm going to pick up, the one I'm going to pick up on is the hierarchy of disclosure, which is a very sociological term. I'm a sociologist by training. But by this, I mean, actually, customers are strategic in their disclosures. And you might be thinking, well, actually tell me something new. But we need to know this and recognize this, because it means when they actually start to disclose, we don't just jump on or draw a line at the first thing that they're going to actually do. I thought I had 20 minutes rather than 3 minutes left. I've got 3 minutes left more. Anyway, you just need to focus, recognize that actually the disclosure is going to be strategic. So this person here, it says, so in terms of your physical disability, be fine about disclosing that. Yep. But in terms of your mental health situation, I wouldn't mention it at all. So they have in mind a list of things that they're going to tell you and not tell you. And it's actually working to try and get the full picture. The second thing I wanted to just point out here very, very quickly is just being rushed through. And that is, again, jumping on a disclosure. Actually, yep, you told us that. Brilliant. Fantastic. I've got everything I need. You don't know what you need until you start having a conversation about that person's needs. I'll just leave that seed. So this is all important because there's different types of disclosures. So in our training and in the way we engage with customers, we need to actually take that into account and build that into our models. Right. Last thing, and I promise I will try and finish this in 2 minutes, Kirsty. It's disclosure environment. So there's a lovely shot of Canary Wharf and a sculpture there. Sometimes we think about disclosures as being like a single moment in time, something that's happening with a customer right now or has happened. But actually, the environment of our organization can encourage or discourage disclosure. So when I said to you earlier, which needs could you meet today for your disabled or vulnerable customers, you probably came up with things like, well, hearing loops, maybe colored paper, large print, braille. So the question is, if you can immediately identify those needs today, why not find out at the earliest possible point who might have those needs in your customer base? And sometimes we worry about disclosure. Oh, we're going to open the gates, the floodgates. People are going to tell us all sorts of things. We can't meet their needs. But actually, there is a common set of needs that you've been meeting for years and years and years. So why not start there as the beginning of your disclosure environment? And that's actually in the FCA guidance. They are asking you to understand the nature and scale of characteristics of vulnerability, which includes needs, in your customer base. So this is an ideal opportunity. So a disclosure environment is about creating these mechanisms. So let me just quickly, in a minute or two, just give you some examples. So here's Halifax, a Halifax account. And this is very, very recent. The Halifax in the account dashboard have just started to ask about some very basic needs which are related to disability and the Equality Act. They've started to ask about your support options. There's a little kind of drop-down menu. And you can indicate things in relation to letters and statements, to phone calls, to setting up kind of appointments, what some of your basic needs might need. And as I see this is the Lloyd's Group starting to build a basis on which to maybe expand some of these needs over time. But they're starting with the things that we should be meeting because they're anticipatory duties under the Equality Act 2010. So this is a great way to comply and to understand support need. Barclays, Money Worries Hub, send out signals. So we talked about reassuring, a disclosure environment, sending out reassuring signals about disclosure to overcome those perceived consequences, those negative consequences. Well, here there are 13, 14 different vignettes of different types of risk groups who might be vulnerable to harm. And when you click on them, it not only just recognizes, actually, we've got customers just like you. It tells you what will happen if you disclose and some of the options that might follow. It's very, very reassuring. So why aren't we finding out at the earliest possible point who might have the needs that you can meet today in your customer base? So to sum this up, we need to go from needs unknown. Here's a typical journey, an onboarding journey. And I think this is where this should and could be happening. So from 1 to 4 here, they've made it as smooth as possible. Welcome. Who are you? Checking your information. Well done, Kirsty. You're a member of this bank. However, once you've got past the application and that psychological tension of have I got or haven't got the product has been soothed and welcome to your bank, why don't we ask about basic support needs there? Because we certainly ask about marketing preferences. I'm sure we've all been in that situation. So it's a great opportunity. So thank you for the opportunity to talk today and to slightly go over. Thank you, Kirsty. So in conclusion, we looked at decisions, types of environment, types of disclosure and environment. And we've actually said we need to be working towards a disclosure environment. So when you're thinking about the FCA guidance, please do pick up that box in the right hand corner, but then recognize actually disclosure is about understanding customers' needs. It plays into communications, and it plays into the other elements of the policy too. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, VRS.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. Having attended the Vulnerability Academy last year, I know that we could talk about all those sort of issues all day. So I appreciate giving you 15 minutes is borderline cruel to talk about the vulnerability issues.
Probably more painful for everyone else as opposed to me. But
yeah,
yes,
no problems at all. Okay, so we'll open up to any questions. Has anybody got any questions? Do you want to raise your hand or pop them in the chat? I'm happy to read them out. Or if you want to say them yourselves, please feel free.
This is the point where you're supposed to anchor it, Kirsty, and say, we always get hundreds of questions for our speakers. So
well, we do, so I'm quite shocked.
It's me. I've worked that one out.
You've just shocked everyone.
Not a problem at all. Maybe I've just explained everything.
Oh, no, we've got a few coming through. We've got one from Ellen Carroll, says, is your research on disclosure available to view, Chris?
It is, Ellen. Lovely to hear from you. It's you can get the existing version of the research in Technical Guide 3 of our GDPR series, which is at the Money Advice Trust website. The updated version that I've given you a sneak preview of will be available towards the end of the year.
Okay, thank you for that. We've also got one from Liz Clark saying, is there such a thing as a fraudulent registration as vulnerable?
I think that's probably to Helen rather than
possibly. And I mean, the short answer is, well, yes, possibly. But as I said before, I think it takes quite a lot to actually come out and say, I am in a vulnerable position. I think the worry is probably more that people won't. And if it means that there's a couple of people that say they're vulnerable because they think it's going to absolve them of a few debts, then it's not going to. And I think that's just something we have to take a little bit because of the benefits of actually sharing the fact that those people that are genuinely vulnerable are genuinely vulnerable. But yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, brilliant. Any other questions, anybody?
I have a question. So it's Joseph Surtees from the Cabinet Office. Thanks for that presentation, Chris. That was really interesting. So in the public sector, I guess it's probably fair to say, and you'll realise as much as anybody, there's quite a range of sort of technical ability to identify vulnerability at the moment. From the work you've done, is there sort of a pathway that you can take organisations through where they're at quite a low level through some quite simple processes and approaches up to some more complex stuff, a sort of journey, as it were?
Okay. Is that a journey to disclosure or a general first few steps, Joe?
Journey to a sort of a better disclosure environment, because I think it's fair to say across the public sector there's some organisations that are far more advanced on that than others, and we'd like to get them all up to the same level.
Okay, so I'd say three things. Number one, assure the senior leadership team that they're not going to be washed away by a wave of disclosures of need which they fear they cannot meet, but yet they've raised the expectation that they will be met. If you start with a narrow sense of what needs you can meet today and start to actually unpack which of your, or identify which of your customers have those needs, that's a great place to start. I went to one very large firm that had millions of customers, but had no idea how many of them were disabled. They had a form on their website which you could register as disabled, but it was tucked away in the back pages, and it wasn't very well designed, and no one ever really made it part of routine practice. That's the first thing, is kind of focusing down on kind of what needs you can meet today and start asking about them tomorrow. The second thing is sending out the right signal. So you saw the Barclays Money Worries page, the Money Worries Hub. It sends out signals about, if you tell us about X, you're not alone. That's the first thing. So some behavioral science there and anchoring. And secondly, here's what might happen. And then the third thing is building these mechanisms, these opportunities for disclosure into all of your channels. So not just, it doesn't have to be in an app like Monzo. It can be equally just mentioned in your regular kind of written correspondence. It can be on your part of your onboarding journey or your initial engagement, and make it routine. So it's about keeping it really simple and not letting kind of what about kind of overturn kind of a simple and practical start.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful.
Right. Laura Cronin from Shoesmiths.
Hi, thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, Chris. That was really useful. I stalk you on LinkedIn anyway, so a lot of my questions have already been answered.
It's always nice to meet my stalkers.
Yeah, and I mean that in a positive way. That's in command too, right? You've already started to answer it actually a little bit, but just you piqued my interest when you were sharing some of the good work that companies such as Barclays are doing, you know, the kind of the customer journey type things. In your opinion, because there's so many different ways that companies can encourage disclosure, either through, you know, through internet, through web, or through the conversations that the agents on the phone are having. Would you say that there are certain must-haves from a company perspective? Because I'm just, you know, there's different things we can do. I'm just wondering, there's definitely certain things that we could do within our particular firm to make things better, but I guess I don't know where to start really, because there's so many great ideas out there. It's what's the focus, what's the priority?
It's the problem with vulnerability is it's overwhelming. When you think about, like, do you remember those maps the FCA made of vulnerability in the UK? And it looked like for maybe in the 1970s, there was one man in Cornwall who wasn't vulnerable. And it just looked, you thought, well, where do you start? Do you start with Alzheimer's? Do you start with cancer? Do you do mental health? And how do you do that when you've got limited resources? And as maybe a medium to smaller operator, you've got to make choices between doing X and Y. And I think the overriding principle is obviously keep it simple, but do it early. And one of the reasons I'm really interested in disclosure environments is to try and capture those support needs, or to try and identify those people who've got support needs that we could meet tomorrow. You know, we already do this stuff. And that would be where I start off on disclosure. But I'd also recognize alongside that not everybody will disclose. Some will need identification. So think of this like a triangle. Disclosures in the bottom corner of the triangle. The top of the triangle is like identification. Our staff, and I don't think identification is always as difficult as we might think. I think the difficult point is moving from identification to conversation and understanding. I think that's the tricky mood. And then the bottom corner of the triangle, because not everybody will disclose, not everybody can be identified, and that's design. We then have to design for those people who cannot be identified, who will not disclose, to try and make our product services journeys accessible and usable even. So I think it's keeping it simple and reassuring leadership throughout that you're not opening the floodgates. I think that is often the worry. They think, well, if we do this for this, you know, we're going to have to do this for everybody. But it's keeping it very, very narrow and focused.
And Chris, it's Ian. I wonder if I can jump in and add something there. So for those that don't know me, I work with Chris on the Vulnerability Academy at Money Advice Trust and UK Finance. And I think you're right. I think the latest FCA guidance is obviously a lot shorter than the previous versions, which is good. But in terms of where to start, that goes back to these previous two questions. I think it is, what are we trying to achieve? So what the FCA is saying is that it wants people whose circumstances dictate otherwise to receive as good an outcome as everybody else. So it basically means I should be able to use the product or service that you're providing and receive the same outcome as anybody else does. So all the things you've just talked about are really relevant. How do staff identify? How do we encourage disclosure? How do we design all of this into our products? How do we understand our customer base and target market to make sure we're focusing our efforts in the place that's going to make the most difference? But the really simple starting point is a very basic conversation that I think you could apply at any firm level, which is, for the product or service that we are providing you with, is there any help you need to be able to use it the way it's intended? And I think if you start with that and build everything else around it, that is the crux. Not everybody will tell you, so I need to try and get more people to tell you. You won't be able to spot everybody who doesn't necessarily know that that's what they need. So you need to improve your identification. You don't necessarily have the ability to provide them with the support they need yet. So you need to build that into your design. But at the point where you can get customers to tell you what they need to use the product in the way it's intended, you've at least got something to work with.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Chris, for that. We're running a little bit behind on time, so what we'll do is sort of push presentations back by about 10 minutes. So we'll aim to finish all the presentations by about 10 past 12. That's all right with everybody. Josh, are you ready to crack on? Yeah, I appreciate we have got some more questions for Chris, but if we can save those for the end of the session today, that would be great.
Yep, no problem.
Thanks, Josh.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Josh, and I'm head of collections at the debt purchase company SLL Capital Limited. I've been asked to speak briefly today about how the current COVID pandemic has affected collections in general and how our organisation uses the VRS. Firstly, I think we can all agree that how organisations handle and identify vulnerable customers has improved greatly in recent years. And now more than ever, it's important that firms are taking positive action and using all the tools available to them to ensure this continues to improve. With growing numbers of people in vulnerable circumstances, it's more relevant than ever that firms recognise and respond to their individual needs. From a collections viewpoint, it's vital that we achieve fair outcomes, as mentioned a moment ago, for all our customers, that customers' needs are adequately assessed and that all communications are clear and concise. So here, the FCA published its portfolio letter for debt purchase, debt collection, debt administrator firms on the 18th of January, identifying drivers of harm and how firms should mitigate risks. It highlights the major concern that firms can fail to recognise and address the needs and challenges faced by vulnerable consumers. The FCA states that they expect consumers in default or arrears difficulties to be treated with forbearance and due consideration, and that the amounts of these types of consumers we think will vastly increase as many people have been made redundant, some have been furloughed or have been even caught the coronavirus over the last 12 months and may be suffering long-term COVID issues. In August 2020, Citizens Advice estimated that 6 million UK adults have fallen behind on at least one household bill during the pandemic. And they're saying that 1 in 5 of those who have fallen behind are unable to afford essentials. I'm sure many firms like ourselves, SLL Capital, have been holding accounts, freezing interest charges, communicating with individuals about their own personal circumstances regarding COVID and the impact it is having on them since the beginning of the pandemic. We obviously expect that to continue going forward. I think all of us may know of loved ones or friends who've struggled financially or mentally over the last 12 months. I know from my own experience that I found it hard working from home, having my first child during the lockdown. It can be very challenging to say the least. If I could have the next slide, please, Heidi. The debt respite or the breathing space regulations that are to be introduced in May 2021 will give people in problem debt the right to legal protections from creditor action for up to 60 days. This gives them time to receive advice and potentially enter an appropriate scheme to resolve their debt. This will help consumers overcome some of the impacts of the coronavirus, and there will be 2 types of breathing space shown here. So a standard breathing space is available to anyone with problem debts. It gives them legal protections from creditor action for up to 60 days. The protections include pausing most enforcement action and contact from creditors and freezing most interest and charges on their debts. The second one here shows a mental health crisis breathing space. This is only available to someone who is receiving mental health crisis treatment, and it has some stronger protections. So it lasts as long as the person's mental health crisis treatment, plus an extra 30 days. So no matter how long the crisis treatment lasts, it will run for that period plus 30 days. If I could have the next slide, please, Heidi. Going forward, we will see more people seek debt advice and resolutions such as IVAs, bankruptcy, or debt relief orders. There may be a greater need for people in financial distress to have access to an appropriate debt solution. The new breathing space scheme being introduced, coupled with the potential impacts on personal indebtedness as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, means that it will be considered if the current DRO limits need to be changed. and the proposal is to set new monetary limits, which are shown here below. The proposal is increase the total amount of debt allowable to 30,000 up from 20,000, increase the value of assets owned by an individual to 2,000 up from 1,000, and increase the level of surplus income to £100 up from £50 per month. If I could have the next slide, please, Heidi. The FCA recently published final guidance for firms on the fair treatment of vulnerable customers, which Chris has presented to us a moment ago. The guidance aims to create a practical shift in firm behaviours so vulnerable customers can achieve the same outcomes as other customers. It said that firms should embed the fair treatment of vulnerable customers into their culture, policies and processes throughout the whole customer journey. And this is where at SLL Capital, we as an organisation find the VRS a very useful tool to help us meet the requirements. For example, when a debt portfolio is purchased, this is searched against the VRS as part of our cleansing process. When SLL matches a new portfolio customer against the VRS, it allows us to remove the matched customer from our automated communications process. The account is passed on to our specialist team, who will reach out in a more appropriate way. Engaging any customer the right way will always achieve a better outcome. Engaging a vulnerable consumer the right way not only helps achieve a better customer outcome, but it's more rewarding for our specialist vulnerability team. This is even more apparent in the current pandemic as COVID touches all of us, I think, at both ends of the phone. Another way we use VRS, every quarter we search its database of consumers against the data set of the VRS to locate any of our customers that have registered with the VRS. If matched, we'll remove them from our automated collection cycle process again, and our vulnerability team will attempt to contact them by telephone to try and discuss their circumstances and provide support. Our vulnerability team would cater a bespoke service to them specifically to minimize any stress to the customer and exacerbating the problem. Our vulnerability team also signposts the VRS when dealing with vulnerable disclosures via telephone. And with the customer's consent, we register individuals against the VRS if they feel it is appropriate for them to do so. Individual users can opt either to be pre-declined for financial service applications, or if they prefer, they can simply add a referral flag to the names to make organisations aware of their circumstances. This may include applications in existing customer relationships, such as in managing arrears or collections in the most appropriate way. At SLL, I think someone mentioned fraud a moment ago, we're seeing an increase in financial fraud, where a cohabiting partner fraudulently applies for loans and services in their unbeknown partner's name. They take the money or goods and leave their partner with the responsibility of paying back the loans or goods provided. In cases of domestic financial abuse, a consumer can register themselves. With the auto decline flag. This will save lenders and service providers loans and goods that they will struggle to get repaid and save a vulnerable person from having further financial abuse committed against them. It's a win-win situation for lender and registered VRS consumer. By sharing and receiving information with others via the VRS, we have seen many benefits. Not only is it allowing us to treat any vulnerable individuals fairly from the very start of our communications, but also later in recovery stages. For example, after exhausting all our standard collection strategies, we may have no option but to consider litigation. At that point, we would run a search of the VRS. SLL will use all the tools available to us, including the CRAs, to prevent making a bad situation worse for the customer. It may be they've registered on the VRS due to some personal life problems at that moment in time, and that could be the reason why you've had no payment or any contact for a prolonged period. From my experience, the VRS has identified a number of SLL customers that are registered, and this has allowed us to better serve the vulnerable customer. Obviously, in my job, it helps having insight to our customers, and especially to those customers that are vulnerable. I would like to see more firms use the VRS and share their vulnerable consumers with the VRS. And the consistent message I hear from vulnerable people is of them having to repeat their circumstances over again and again to all the firms and organisations that they have relationships with. And I think we've all experienced being passed around on calls and when organisations, when calling up about personal matters, Can you imagine having to do that when you're experiencing vulnerability issues and having to repeat the story to all the businesses you have? I think it must be very harrowing for some people, and I'm sure that we can all help vulnerable people better than that. All firms that use the VRS will have a heads up in identifying vulnerable customers against the register. And I think in these uncertain times, there's never been a greater need to know, share and care for vulnerable customers. I'm pleased that SLL uses the VRS, allowing me to do a better job in identifying and helping me and my team to make the right approach to our vulnerable customers. Thank you all for listening to me today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you, everyone.
That's great. Thank you so much, Josh. Okay, does anybody have any questions? If you want to raise a virtual hand or send it in the chat or just start talking, please feel free. Give everyone a chance to type things out. Oh, Laura Cronin.
I've always got questions. I'm so sorry. I try and hold back. Well, I try and hold back, but if it's quiet, I'm getting in there. No, really,
my own heart.
Yeah, really useful. Thank you for that. I guess my question is around training and preparation of the guys on the phone. So I think you mentioned that you have a specialist vulnerability team, which is something currently my place of work don't have. The guys that are on the telephone, they're pretty much trained to be able, for everything, which is I think is really, really challenging. But in terms of the training in your area of work, what does that typically look like?
Yes, so it's quite intense. Obviously, the people that are put forward for the vulnerable calls are the more experienced staff that have maybe a bit more experience in dealing with disclosures over the phone. They're trained. The trigger words are everyone in the organisation would know the trigger words, and then the call would then be passed over to someone more experienced to encourage the person to talk maybe a bit more openly about their situation. But yeah, the training is quite rigorous, and they have good scripts to follow. They know about signposting various organisations, not just the VRS, in mind. So yeah, they have a more intense version of training than your standard call centre staff would. Obviously, our operation is overseas, so yeah, it does take some time and to make sure everyone's up to speed, and it's reviewed regularly as well. So I do a lot of that at the moment.
Thanks, Josh.
That's all right.
Brilliant. We've got a question from Claire Williams in the chat, which is, what are your views on actually referring to the actual customer as a vulnerable customer? Is it possible this could cause offence?
Yeah, you're correct. It could do. I mean, we generally talk about the customer's situation. We ask open questions, and obviously we're calling people about debts that they haven't repaid. So generally, finding out about their circumstances is part of our conversation right from the off. And yeah, I find a lot of people are quite open. Sometimes people want to be more private about that information, and that's fair enough. But we would put measures in place and allow breathing space where appropriate. But yeah, you're right. Some people can find it offensive. I mean, we suggest the VRS and its benefits, and say, it will stop you from having to repeat yourself, which someone mentioned earlier as well. And yeah, that I wouldn't want to keep repeating myself over and over again if I was genuinely vulnerable. But yeah, I suppose it depends on the person there. So that's a good question as well.
Yeah, can I just jump in there, because that's something I sort of battle with, is the label vulnerable, and obviously we're called the Vulnerability Registration Service from our side of things. But I mean, having sort of gone through this for the last 5 years and really tried to get momentum about addressing it, I think the unfortunate answer is, in the short term, that's the word that is consistently being used, and I don't know if we can change that in the short term. But I do think it's something, it's another label that nobody wants to have. So I think we all need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's another question that's coming from Lewis in the chat. So at a time when people are having a harder time talking on the phone about their difficulties, do you use any kind of solution that allows the customer to talk to the agent without being on the phone?
I mean, I find personally a lot of people prefer to write about the situation. Some people are writers, and they would, an email or a letter disclosing their situation is as is sometimes even better than a phone call, because they go into a bit more detail. They're sort of letting you know their story, what's happening, and yeah, I mean, writing emails and letters, sometimes even SMS. You get very brief SMS. We may attempt to call them. If that doesn't work, then we send a letter saying, look, we've placed this on hold. You've mentioned something that is flagged up for ourselves, that we should be giving you some breathing space, and then we try and go open some sort of communication with the customer there. So yeah, it could be emails, SMS, and letters as well.
Brilliant, thank you. One more from Bill. Josh, we have an escalation policy in place. Do you have additional support in place for those within your vulnerable customers team? Do you look to rotate?
So, like I say, we have a separate vulnerability team. They're dedicated to these calls and and these disclosures, and they do deal with them amongst themselves. They do generally pass a call, sort of one person would take a call, then the next person would take that vulnerable call. They do sort of do that. We have so yeah, they do rotate who's dealing with it, and obviously they're all monitored by our quality monitoring, and then monitored again by ourselves. So yes.
Yep. Last one, Lee from Money and Pension Service. Do you have a process for escalating a customer into a safeguarding support service?
Well, I mean, our vulnerable customers would be immediately taken out of any standard communications, and they would be dealt with entirely separately to everyone else. If escalating to a safeguarding support service, I mean, we signpost, so we signpost to everyone and make suggestions. Obviously, debt management may be able to help step change people like that, and if you have a disclosure about mental health, mind, Samaritans, if someone's feeling really quite down and maybe potentially suicidal. So we signpost and obviously freeze everything and hold everything our end.
Okay, I'll do one more before we move on. From Emma, what support do you offer to your vulnerable customers team in dealing with the disclosures?
Yep, so I mean, we do allow some time after a vulnerable call. If it's quite, you can get some particularly sensitive ones, sometimes where you might have to phone the emergency services to help and go and do a welfare check on someone, for example. And yeah, they're allowed some time afterwards to maybe make a cup of tea and sit down, and they talk with myself and other senior management about the disclosure. When we're reviewing calls and monitoring calls, they have a chance as well to talk about it. And sometimes some of the staff may be dealing with some issues, but if that did happen, then they wouldn't have to come in and then take these sort of calls. That's just something that we would make sure wouldn't happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josh. There's just one comment that's come through from Anthony Sharp on our advisory board. We must always remember that any organisation wishing to record matters of vulnerability from an individual must go through the exercise of explicit consent before proceeding either to record or discuss such personal matters with the customer. Yes. Thank you for that, Anthony. So, Kevin, are you ready for your presentation?
I think so, as long as you've got it ready your end, because I think you're driving the slides for me.
Yep. Heidi, are you ready with Kevin's presentation?
So first of all, welcome everybody. Given a couple of the speakers have already talked about the FCA vulnerability, and the previous speaker talked about the debt respite scheme, I'm going to keep some of those elements to a minimum today, and I've really focused what I'm doing today around engagement. So just the same discussion around disclosure. I think critically what we're looking at now with the debt respite scheme coming in May is how we collaborate more effectively on a cross-industry basis. We've already heard from Joe Surtees today from Cabinet Office. There's a lot of work going on around what's going on in the government sector, both local government and central government, and a number of the FCA regulated firms from the collection space. But overall, we're looking at a very fluid environment where I think the Financial Lives has shown that there's a massive level of low financial resilience. And I think many of the debt advice agencies are reporting an increasing number of customers coming to them with a negative surplus income. So we've got to look at this in context in what impact will breathing space actually have. And critical to this, I think, particularly when we look at the low levels of engagement with the debt advice sector, will this be a stimulus for better engagement? So we're looking to help identify and support vulnerable customers, typically where they have multiple creditors, and they do require to have that evaluation. Now, some of the debt respite scheme doesn't require a standard financial statement to be completed right up front, but it still does seem to require that a fairly detailed assessment is undertaken before a recommendation is required in and around whether a debt respite scheme would be suitable. And I'd also pose that question at that time as to whether the vulnerability registration service would become relevant as well. So a point Helen made at a recent event I attended was that the VRS is likely to stay there longer than the 60 days that breathing space lasts for. So there will be legitimately cases where you may want to make that simultaneous assessment right at the beginning when somebody approaches you. So Heidi, if you just wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide. Rather than repeating too much of the information covered so far, I'm mainly going to be talking about standard breathing space today and the impact of that. So this is designed for somebody with problem debt, and generally that means unmanageable debt, looking for support and some relief from creditor action. And indeed, I think as we heard from the last speaker, whether that creditor action is actually signposting somebody who has got debt advice skills. So I think the point I've made earlier on is there's a big difference between a debt collector and somebody who's regulated to provide debt advice. And many of the creditors, particularly the debt purchasers that we just heard, have to make that critical assessment where if they're only dealing with one of the debts in the whole wallet, is this fair and reasonable that we should actually get somebody to take a more holistic view in and around their problems? And indeed, when you look at the assessment around different vulnerability characteristics, would they be better suited to be working with somebody that is professionally trained in this environment? So standard breathing space is available to any client with problem debt. That is generally one eligible debt or more. It's available for 60 days with a midway assessment. At the end of the 60 days, then the breathing space registration is held by the insolvency service for a further 15 months. So data retention is a factor in this. And many of the questions that are asked around what is the impact, what is held on my file, this is designed to be a private register, and the insolvency services have communicated to creditors and debt advisors with regard to what their obligations are, but who can actually access and see the information. So critically within this, an individual can access their own information that's held by the insolvency service along with the debt advisor. The creditor gets a more limited view in and around the debts that they have within it, and they have an obligation that when they get notified to undertake an overall single customer view to identify any other eligible debts. And that for many creditor organisations, notably government agencies, can require quite some effort to look across many lines of business, for example, HMRC with different lines of tax, and to identify whether there are multiple debts in play, some of which may not actually have crystallised yet, they may have been deferred, and that is another complication. The other factor here is a moratorium applies to the debt, not to the debtor. So joint debts can be included, and there is still some working through here to understand that if on a standard breathing space, a consumer can only have one breathing space in 12 months, but you've got a joint debt, does that preclude another party who may be cohabiting or actually just have a joint debt from accessing breathing space because one of their debts has been participant in a breathing space in the previous 12 months? So there's some detail to be worked through, and then understanding what protections actually in place. And for me, one of the biggest challenges here is you're meant to continue with your priority liabilities. So paying the mortgage, paying the rent, paying your council tax, whilst the breathing space is going on. And to my point earlier on, there are an awful lot of consumers that the debt advice sector is seeing now that have negative surplus income, so they don't have any disposable income. So in order to benefit, do we really have to say that at the point that they access this advice, they've got to be paying all their priority creditors? Or are you going to take away that protection on that basis? So there are still a lot of considerations there where the assessment still needs to be undertaken, but it may well be that they're not eligible for breathing space, or actually the debt advisor feels that that probably isn't the path to take forward, and they may urgently need to bypass that and go straight into the debt solution process, whether that could be a formal solution like a debt relief order. And the previous speakers mentioned again that the Insolvency Service are trying to align the new DRO eligibility criteria with the launch of breathing space, and that could be very important. And you know, many of my debt advice colleagues mentioned to me how difficult it is to actually try and set up something like a DRO within a 2-month window. And so obtaining that breathing space may allow either a referral to a DRO intermediary or for somebody to take stock of their position. And the reason that is important, I attended a VRS event with Step Change last week run by Pega, and it was interesting to see that the level of digital engagement that Step Change are talking about on first approach, 78% in the last quarter of last year, fantastic. But the number of first time accesses to debt advice that go whole way through end to end is only just over 20%. So many people do checkpoint, have to come back, take stock. So trying to do this assessment and giving people time and the breathing space to make a choice, and again, disclosure decisions that Chris talked about earlier on, very important in that, is that this is not likely to be a once and done process. It's going to require further involvement, and in particular, as we mentioned with the government agencies, particularly around things like DROs, it's really important to surface all of the debts, both from an eligibility point of view, but the fact is if they are excluded at the beginning, they don't get included in the DRO. So finding those other debts is pretty important, and that can take time to shake the tree. So critical to this can be accessed via an FCA regulated debt advisor. Local authorities do also apply. So to me, the key hook, if I can just move on to the next slide, is how we utilize the debt advice engagement. So just picking out a few key statistics from the Financial Lives, enormous number of people, as Chris alluded to, and sometimes the number becomes such that you think, can that be real? But the levels of low financial resilience, what is quite clear to see from February 2020 to the October survey, rose from 10.7 million to 14.2 million. That's a very, very large increase. Similarly, we saw very large increases in take-up of universal credit from businesses that didn't qualify from some of the government self-employed schemes. Worryingly, some of the coping strategies involve things like use of food banks, but even more worrying for me in some respects is the take-up of further credit. And this inevitably makes creditors nervous that in the immediate lead up to seeking breathing space, to one of the questions raised earlier on, is has somebody gone off and taken out more credit and then immediately gone into some form of debt relief as a result of that? So finding the right balance is their critical part of that key assessment, and said is, I did that because I had to. And the old adage we used to have in this sector was it took 9 months to do something about dealing with your debts. That still seems to be indicative now, and we'll come on to one of the slides that suggests that holds true. The FCA are saying that about 1.7 million people access debt advice between March and October. Seems remarkably high relative to some of the figures coming out of the leading debt advice agencies like Step Change. So I've just taken a quick snapshot out of their December report, which shows steady growth in the number of debt advice sessions. But the element that struck me in this was the digital advice was relatively static, when I think the FCA are looking at a major growth in that sector. So if I can just flip on to the next slide and maybe build on that a little. So within the Financial Lives, they've shown the gradual increase in demand for debt advice from 2017 to the period during the course of COVID. And there they've split that between first-time users, 69%, and those that have used debt advice before. And I think this is going to be quite important, is that this once and done isn't the case. Many people do need multiple sessions, but also we've got to look at how people are engaging and whether they are able to fulfill this quite simply in, you know, a once and done approach, or whether this needs to be done in small bite-sized chunks, often involving different medium. So I think it is interesting when you look at some of the step change figures, the engagement is very similar in terms of the number that go through from first contact to actually having a debt advice session, which I think is around about 35%, to then going into a debt solution like a DMP, which is more like 18%. But those conversion rates hold true against each of the medium, whether it be web chat, telephony, or through an online journey through some of their new tooling that they implemented in the middle of last year. So if I can just move on a second. So critically, we then had the Woolard report, which has come in overlaid with the Financial Lives information. And critically, they're looking at some of the biggest barriers to accessing some of the services, and some of them are quite worrying. Embarrassment is one of these, so disclosure is a key element we need to overcome. But the one that struck me probably more so was that 31% still had a lack of awareness of what the services were that are actually available. And that seemed, after all of these years, incredible. But nonetheless, that seems to have come out as a really striking number. But for those that did access it, the level of satisfaction was incredibly high. So they benefited critically from this. But when we look at the bottom figure, it says that we're just scratching the surface of this. So they're suggesting that 6.7 million people felt that they were going to need to access debt advice in the next 6 months. Now, bear in mind, this is October 2020, and we're now nearly at the end of March. That's the end of 6 months. So where is this tsunami? The forbearance schemes have really, really helped, both with FCA regulated firms. I think the UK regulatory network have issued some very useful information from some of the other regulators, and the call for evidence with government has shown the Chancellor schemes have really made a difference. If you could just build on the slide, Heidi, if that's okay. So critically, I think for me was that the evidence still is we're waiting for this to kick in. So there has been limited engagement, and really and truly, is the debt respite scheme going to act as a catalyst for better engagement? So if creditors are going to collaborate with the debt advice sector to point to people into doing this key assessment, not only in terms of eligibility for the debt respite scheme, but probably more critically for vulnerability disclosure events with somebody that they trust, who then has to make a critical assessment as to whether either registering the vulnerability registration service or registering for debt respite scheme is in their best interest. So I can just move on to the next slide. So when I looked at the numbers that came out of this, not only was the 31% pretty worrying, I think, you know, whilst these numbers may look low, I've tried to get an appointment. On face value, it suggests that, you know, that supply isn't the problem, but probably when you look at some of those numbers, 10% of something big is something big. And therefore, there are going to be pockets here where data analytics, which I think Josh referred to earlier and several others have, is becoming increasingly important in segmenting and looking at your customer base and the people that are accessing your service. So Heidi, if I can just move on and maybe illustrate some of that. So one of the things I've certainly been very interested in and participated in as a trade body, we've worked closely with Chris, Colin Trend and others in the past with things like vulnerability guides, and we're still trying to crack this nut around identification. But what to me is crucial in collections is making that clear distinction that Josh touched upon between somebody who's a won't pay or potentially fraudulent case. And that, as Chris has said, that needs to be done at the very earliest opportunity. so we send somebody down the right treatment path. And that may mean that your organization is not well enough equipped to do that, and you may indeed need to use others that are far more specialist. And we're seeing that with some of the Cabinet Office, the work they've done with the likes of DEMSA, where they have specialist suppliers, where they're taking them down a regulatory approach to look at how they would deal with certain cases where the government agency or the local authority has a one-size-fits-all approach at the moment, and is now looking at how they find these treatment paths over time. But when we look at some of these, particularly in some of what I would regard reluctant creditors, they don't lend money for as their core business, but credit is inevitably a part of that in some sense. So you can accumulate arrears, but then dealing with things like benefit overpayments, avoidable fines, which is about debt prevention. So the education process, again, pretty critical, where many organizations that are represented on the call today are becoming very effective at providing education to users to avoid things that I would regard as avoidable debts. And this principle of fair by design increasingly coming to the fore. So certainly with our members, we encourage them to look at the government functional standard that was published last May, and how some of these tool sets to facilitate income and expenditure assessment, and things like, are you in work, are you furloughed, are you out of work, how you use some of that tooling, how you make a distinction between people who have erratic income like the self-employed and they've been critically hit by COVID are brought into play. And that brings about then balanced debt collection practices, which for most FCA regulated firms, they've got to evidence. So record keeping is a key element of the FCA's message, which is woe betide you if you haven't declared what your policies are and actually then enacted that at the coalface. And particularly at the end of March, we have the new conduct rules coming into play for just about all frontline staff. And to me, that's all part of the joined up agenda. The conduct rules, the new financial guidance, the new debt respite scheme, the new rules around DROs, you know, unless I'm mistaken, it begins to feel like we've got something that's a bit more joined up. I also think that we mentioned Agile very early on. COVID has brought about a lot of lessons learnt, where many organizations have had to implement things remarkably quickly, but they now got to learn from those and mature some of their services. As we've seen now, coming out of COVID, we're seeing a number of recovery tools, some over a shorter period of time, 12 months, some over a much longer period of time. So if I could just move on quickly. Again, the data analytics part of this from the Financial Lives story, I'm just going to speedily go through this. You can see that in the over-indebted segment, there is a much greater need here, and we need to be focusing across the portfolio. And I've also then highlighted the area with adults who show characteristics of vulnerability, and it's ensuring that you have that capability within your toolkit to undertake this type of analysis. So if I can just move on a second. So Joe, I've taken one of your slides out of your deck around some of the policy solutions suggested by the Cabinet Office that are being taken forward. This is part of the initial report, but clearly within here is this segmentation between assessing for vulnerability and assessing potential fraud-related cases. And that could be third-party fraud, as Josh talked about, or it could genuinely be cases that are masquerading as vulnerable. And also, I think really importantly, the fact now that better engagement with the debt advice from providers, including sort of the hotkey arrangements, you know, a number of the organizations are running debt awareness campaigns later in March, which is important. I think MAPS is rebranding itself a little later on this month, but getting that awareness is critical, because at the moment those figures earlier on were slightly worrying in terms of the proportion of parties that were surveyed that didn't know around some of the options that are available to them, despite the fact that most creditor communications now cover, you know, national debt line, Citizens Advice Bureau step change for persistent debt and other solutions, it still is the fact that it's only when the problem becomes acute that certain people are actually looking to access and find a resolution. So if I could just move on quickly. So I think this is my consolidated slide of what Chris showed you on the big version earlier on. I presented this at the last VRS event, but it reinforces some of the points that Chris made. Good product design is critical. Fair by design is critical. Customer service needs to build into this. Establishing a single customer view is very important. And we then need to look at where the debt respite scheme and the vulnerability registration service fit into that assessment. And underneath the drivers, Colin Trend pointed out to me that whilst COVID is a massive driver of vulnerability, that we have to be careful that when somebody is no longer subject to COVID, we don't forget about the 4 drivers that sit above it. So Helen's view that we've got sub-flags, you've got to work on the basis there could be multiple sub-flags, because people can be vulnerable to a number of different things with different harms that come off the consequence of it, rather than just having one flag set at any moment in time. If I can just move on then very quickly. So really conclusion on some of the areas that I'm seeing, more cases with no or minimal surplus income. Are these better suited to a debt respite scheme? Is that what it's designed for? But are we then going to trip over ourselves with somebody's ability to meet their ongoing liabilities? And that's something I think that many of the debt advice agencies are currently wrestling with. You've got to do the debt respite scheme eligibility assessment, but ultimately, are we going to get many cases that are going to get referred into breathing space? Some of the forbearance schemes need to mature. And whilst we have many of these with deferral schemes that have just been extended to September, when breathing space comes in May, should we still be letting people use the deferral schemes to the maximum if you only have one chance on a standard breathing space? So it may be better to take full advantage of forbearance schemes and then only consider breathing space at the point where debt problems become truly acute. I've talked about fair by design. Data protection is going in the same direction, and the ICO has now issued a number of very useful toolkits around data analytics, how that is used, both in terms of protecting the consumer, but also how this information should be used to drive a number of these treatment strategies. So if I can just conclude on, I think I'm on my final slide. I haven't had the shepherd's crook yet that I'm aware of. So critically, my part to this really is about engagement. We need to see better engagement. And I think for me, the thing that I've been trying to work towards for many, many years is that creditors accept the vulnerability of assessment of a debt advisor. Now, this to me seems that great opportunity to do that if you've got people that are sufficiently well trained to do that. So we don't have to put a vulnerable person through the mill that Josh was talking about, that you only have to tell somebody once and that lesson is learnt. Equally well, they have the right to be forgotten. Proper funding is put into place. Let's see what comes out of the Woolard report. But within that, it's also talking about assessments that suggest that something, even if it sounds like £90, some people still have to try and afford that, and that there are assessments now to say that can be waived on the basis of particular criteria that have yet to be articulated by Woolard and the follow-up to it. But to me, that is the door coming slightly ajar around that, which is important. The debt respite scheme, to me, is a key catalyst to a wider range of debt remedies. With the intent, it's there for that somebody in all probability will go into debt solution as a result of that debt advice session. But critically, we've got to think about any detriments that could occur in there. The insolvency service have been clear that shouldn't be any immediate detriment to the credit file, but that still is the supposition that all creditors will behave in the same way, which historically has not been the case, particularly for those that haven't shared data with the credit reference agencies. But this comes at a cost. This due diligence is quite significant. So when you look at what the debt advisor's obligations are, they are quite significant to that midway assessment point. And in doing this, you cannot charge for this service. So the reality is that there needs to be a situation here where we encourage debt advisors to do this assessment, to participate in it, and there still needs to be better education in this piece. So I'm quite pleased the Insolvency Service, Money and Pension Services have just started to launch with the Money Advice Trust some educational tools, some e-learning that is now just been made available to regulated debt advisors. So we've encouraged our members to go and look at that, undertake that, to get a better idea of what's going on. Similarly, for certain creditors, to look at whether some of their agents are better equipped to deal with those customers without it going through a path or a collections path that is necessarily detrimental to them. But it may well be that in referring to one of their panel, that they get a better outcome as a result of going down that regulated path. So Kirsty, that's me done. I don't know how I've done for time because of the delay from before. I have included a couple of slides at the end. I know they're being shared, Kirsty, that may be relevant around data analytics and speech analytics around sentiment analysis that probably run out of time to talk about.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we'll crack on if that's all right with everybody. Thank you for coming back, everybody. Hope we're all rested and relaxed now from the whole 10 minutes that I gave you to have your comfort break. I'd like to introduce Mark now, who will now be doing the IE Hub presentation. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hi, everyone. Mark McElvanney. I'm Sales Director for IE Hub. So I'm going to spend probably the next 10 minutes just talking through our online affordability assessment and how it can be used to support your vulnerable customers. Excuse me. Sorry, Eddie, if you can just jump back one. Or actually, it's fine. Leave it there. Just give you a bit of my background probably before we plod on. So I've been with IE Hub for the last 2 years, but prior to this role, worked within debt advice. So I was in various business development and relationship management roles for Step Change Debt Charity. And prior to that, worked in various customer policy roles for Northern Rock, responsible for rollout of the Common Financial Statement as it was then, and also the establishment of their first vulnerability team. You can see on screen now, obviously, we've got lots of stats, and I know Kevin previously called out some of these. I think for me, some of the big ones is the access to credit, which has been driven through COVID. So 9 million people now borrowing money as part of the coronavirus pandemic. Employed parents twice as likely to have experienced an income loss. Since June 2020, the amount of people borrowing more than £1,000 has gone from 35% to 45%. Self-employed now more likely than employed to have borrowed money, and similar patterns with disabled people. Slides titled "Rapidly Changing Financial Landscape," and that's evidence. And since the slides are produced, furlough has now been pushed out to September. But those under the age of under 30, 35% more likely to be on furlough, and those household incomes less than £10,000 were 60% more likely to be on furlough. The FCA have also suggested potentially 24 million adults are financially vulnerable. Next slide, please, Heidi. Last few stats, I suppose, from me. One of the big things which we've talked about over the years is the links between debt and mental health, and how the two are continually linked, and one being a cause and an effect of the other, where we see 1 in 4 adults in the UK experience a mental health issue at any given year, and 50% of adults who struggle with debt also have mental health issues. From our own IE Hub users and survey we completed earlier this year, we found 67% of respondents were very anxious before speaking to their creditors to set up payment plans. And really, as I go through and tell you a little bit more around IE Hub, what we'll focus on and what I'll talk through more is around financial vulnerability and financial difficulties as just one aspect of total vulnerability, which Helen mentioned earlier on in the presentation. Next slide, please, Heidi. So just to look at the customer perspective and how they maybe managing debt and how they'll be looked at from a contact perspective. So a typical UK consumer will have 6 debts on average. They'll be at different points within those collection journeys, and each creditor will have their own and unique approach to collections. Typically within that, there will be a form of income and expenditure or financial assessment being completed with that customer. They'll vary in length and detail, but can take up to 45 minutes with the customer, typically on the phone, having to relay lots of complex and detailed information from a customer. And many customers will still see that money is very much a taboo subject for them. It can be hard sometimes for them to get their head around what's going on and manage a lot of their financial worries. Typically then, when it comes to a collections call, it can be quite a painful experience for them. And those collections calls aren't always a one and done exercise. The longer their financial vulnerability lasts, or the longer the payment arrangements which they set up, the more likely they are to have to repeat that exercise, not just across their 6 creditors, but multiple times with each creditor throughout a calendar year to update their situation in line with the payment arrangement, or as their situation may change. And as that evolves, they need to update the creditor as to what's going on. From a creditor perspective, obviously lots of time and effort put into the income and expenditure. There's obviously the regulation and the process which they need to follow. But ultimately, the quality of that process can come into question. It's obviously skills of the individual agent, but really importantly, it's the on-the-spot nature of the collections call. I often think about it when I reflect on my time within debt collection. It's a bit like the mastermind chair. You pick up the phone, creditor at the other end, the lights go down, spotlight comes on, and you're asked a series of questions. Because of that pressure, it can often mean that the customer gives out an incorrect piece of information, not necessarily through any fault of their own, but the fact that they're on the spot can mean the information, ultimately the income and expenditure, is incorrect once it's complete, and the poor information can then result in a poor customer outcome. A lot of the time for the customer in dealing with their particular creditors, the anxiety is a byproduct of that particular situation, not necessarily the situation of their total debts. What IE Hub wants to do is work with our partners to put customers back in control of their financial situation. By giving the customer a hand on the wheel, we want to help them understand where they are, take control of that situation, and ultimately reduce their financial anxiety. And the next slide, please, Heidi. So IE Hub, our mission is to empower customers in financial difficulties and reduce their stress and mental anxiety caused by managing debt issues and dealing with multiple creditors. And the next one, please. Thank you. So, as I say, we do that by putting the customer back in control of their financial situation. For many customers, they've probably never completed a budget. They've never sat down and documented their debts, and probably don't have a really detailed view as to how much do they actually owe in total, not just with an individual creditor, but across all of their debts. So things where they may have deliberately gone and taken a particular loan or a particular financial product, but those where they may have struggled accidentally. So things like your utilities, your council tax, your inadvertent creditors. What IE Hub does is allows the customer to create one income and expenditure and share it with any of their creditors who are looking for it at that particular point in time. It's not limited to any particular sector, so we'll cover financial services, utilities, local authorities. We also work with debt advice providers to mean that the customer at any point in time can do one single income and expenditure, share it into IE Hub, and that can then be transferred to any creditor that they want. We go on to the next slide, please, Heidi. IE Hub works across 2 portals. The first portal is the customer side. And what we do, given that the customer has probably never completed a budget before for themselves, we handhold them through the process. They're presented with a series of smart questions, which means the budget which they produce and the questions they asked are tailored to their particular circumstance. So if the customer has children, we'll ask them about childcare related costs. If they don't have a vehicle, we don't bombard them with vehicle running costs and those related travel expenses. We also give the customer the chance to access open banking, so they can use their online bank account to populate their income and expenditure, and ultimately making that creation of the budget as quick and easy and painless as we possibly can for them. iHub's got a series of inbuilt workflows, so we keep the customer engaged. So not just getting them through the process the first time round, but reminding them to update their information at any particular point in time before they then deliver their I&E to their creditors. On the other side, we then have our customer management portal, where a creditor can log in, they can view the income and expenditure, they can match the data against the standard financial statement, they can see maybe where the customer is overspending and have a discussion in that place. Equally, it will flag underspending, so make sure that the customer is covering the essentials that they need to, and ultimately the budget that they provide is fair and reasonable, and ultimately it's robust enough for their situation. Customer consents and shares it with any creditor they want to, and we tailor the delivery to the creditor's particular needs. Equally, so I'm just being nudged for time, so I'll plod on. What we can also do is the journey can start within the customer management system. And in that regard, that's where we work a lot with debt advisors. So debt advisors can populate an I&E on the customer's behalf into IE Hub, which the customer can then share with other creditors. If I'm okay for time, Kirsty, I'll just share a couple of stats and a little bit of customer feedback. Heidi, if you can jump on to slide 9, it's probably the most relevant. As I said earlier, I think the main thing that we want to do is have that empowerment of the customer and really help them overcome their financial anxiety. So say through one of our recent surveys, we've had lots of positive reply from the customer and commenting that they were more able to deal with creditors as a result of going through IE Hub. So that 68%, which I mentioned earlier, who suffered from financial anxiety before speaking to the creditor, of those 77% said they were better able to deal with creditors and more able to set up a payment plan after they'd completed their I&E. Of that, we also then had 88% of users who were able to maintain their repayment, which they agreed with creditors, and 77% said they were better able just to take control of their overall financial situation and speak to other creditors after that had occurred. And then on the very last slide, sorry, I think I've covered those. I've jumped through. Yeah, thanks, Heidi. Yeah, so that's it from me. If there's any questions at all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mark. We've got one question that's come in from Lean in the chat, which is, how does IE Hub relate to the standard financial statement?
Yeah, so IE Hub is built around the SFS. So ultimately the output that we deliver to any creditor is in the SFS format, and creditors who use our portal can see how that I&E which is delivered matches those expenditure types. We've got a RAG status within the portal, so the creditor can see again those over and under spends at a glance. From a customer perspective, we don't talk to them about the SFS. We don't try and overcomplicate the situation and giving them a concept which might be alien to them. They're simply asked questions about their circumstances, and then their delivery, they see a summary of their budget. And from a customer point of view, we only refer to it as their budget or their income and expenditure. We don't talk about the SFS as a concept until it's delivered to the creditor, who can then make that assessment once they've got it on screen.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Mark. Any other questions for Mark? Any virtual hands or any messages in the chat? No?
No, it's all quiet there.
It's all quiet. Okay, no problem. Oh, hang on. One that's come through from Gareth. Hi, does this portal use open banking, and what are your thoughts on how this works?
Yeah, so we use open banking. It's a customer choice. So as part of their profile, they can opt in to open banking. I think at the moment, I think there's a lot that needs to be done as broadly as within an industry to highlight the value of open banking and even just to educate on what open banking is. Certainly, I think from a debt perspective, and reflect on time and collections and debt advice, I think open banking is potentially a bit of a step for a lot of consumers in debt, maybe not being as trusting or wanting to open the doors on their account. But we do see 1 in 5 users opt to go through open banking. From a personal perspective, it makes things much easier. It's cleaner. We present the transactions back to the customer and we show them which budget and category we're going to put them into their budget. They've got a final call on whether they change it or delete any of the particular aspects. But ultimately, it's another tool to get an accurate I&E. It's not necessarily for everybody. I think we'll see usage grow over time, but it is available for those that want it.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. There's one more from Lean. So is IE Hub another way of completing an SFS that removes the need for a debt advice organisation to do it if the latter process would not work for a customer?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's something which puts the control back into the customer's hands. I mean, ultimately, when they deliver the I&E back to yourselves, that it could then mean or could highlight that they do need debt advice. We're not a debt advice provider. It's very much about the customer being able to disclose their current financial position. There might be some obvious budgeting changes which they can make, and they might then opt to set up their payment plans on the back of the I&E which is delivered. But it can work essentially as a gateway to debt advice, or just another point which can help the customer engage, maybe if they're less able to communicate their position over the telephone or don't want to have that conversation.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on now. So Helen, Pettifer, are you with us? Are you ready to share?
Yes, I'm ready to share. Can you see my screen?
Yep, that's all good.
Perfect, brilliant. So thank you, Kirsty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for a fabulous morning. It's been really, really interesting. Lots of thoughts to take away. So I'm just really here to sort of share my thoughts on how to create a vulnerability mindset within your team, both as individuals and actually as an organisation. And this is one of my missions, to actually sort of challenge organizations, the whole approach that they have to vulnerability, and in effect to embed a vulnerability mindset into what they're doing. And I think to start with, as a vulnerability trainer, I wouldn't be right if I didn't share the first and most important thing with regards vulnerability mindset is all about training. It's all about training and giving your team the skills and the capabilities, as the FCA guidance mentioned, but sort of increasing the skills and capabilities of the team. So it's all about increasing awareness and understanding. So make sure that your staff know all the different situations and circumstances that customers may be experiencing, what their needs are. Encourage disclosure, as Chris was alluding to earlier. Try and have those conversations where actually the customer feels compelled and confident to share what they are experiencing. Identify the needs and then actually respond as well, knowing how to start that conversation, how to respond and how to meet those needs. This is almost the foundational level when it comes to training your team, to give them those skills during those difficult and sometimes frustrating conversations that from both parties. Also as well, when we think about training, we do often think of classroom-based training, probably technical virtual classroom at the moment. That's what I'm delivering at the moment. But I want to encourage you to think outside of the box of the classroom training. There is so many different ways that we can learn and we can increase our awareness and understanding of vulnerability. So events like today, webinars, conferences, learning from each other is a really great way of building that vulnerability mindset. We've also got podcasts, we've also got YouTube channels, TED Talks, experts and specialists in what they're talking about. They know what they're talking about, they're wanting to share their information. Think about how you can get charities and other organisations involved with what you're trying to achieve. Charities are a fantastic resource of knowledge and information on people that they support who are facing vulnerable circumstances. We can really channel all of that information. I've completed a lot of training with charities and organisations, but what we do need to be mindful of is financially putting back into their pockets the resources that we're taking. Also, as well, I want to encourage you to get your staff out volunteering in the community, volunteering with charities, having conversations with individuals who are living that lived experience. Hear it directly from them, what their challenges are, what they need from organisations, how they want to be spoken to, how they want to be communicated with. It's all about finding out from people what their lived experience is and how it's impacting them. Also, as well, I've put in there about specialist training. So I've talked about the foundational training, but actually you can really build on that with some real specific specialist training. So this can involve dementia training, bereavement training, mental capacity, mental health, specialist suicidal conversation training as well. These are types of conversations that frontline staff are having on a regular basis. They need to have the skills, the knowledge, the confidence and the resources to actually manage confidently the conversations that they're having. So ultimately, what I have noticed when I've been delivering my training with delegates is that I love the bit where you can see the penny has dropped and actually they really get it. They actually understand how certain experiences, certain life events can really impact individuals, and it can stop them and create barriers with them engaging with organizations. So increase the amount of training that you do. Don't just think of it as classroom training. Think about all the wider options that you've got with regards embedding that vulnerability learning mindset into your staff. The next thing I want to talk about is culture. That was very much threaded through the FCA guidance. It's all about embedding vulnerability into the culture. So when you are thinking about it, embed vulnerability into every single aspect of your organization. So board meetings, team meetings, put it on the agenda, put it through your product design, your service design, communication, the channels, the methods, the tone of voice. Every single aspect of your business should have vulnerability playing a part, and that's the only way that you're going to create a vulnerability mindset in your organization and in your individuals. Another crucial point is to empower your staff. Give them the skills, the resources and the ability to step outside the box, to deviate from script, from the norm, come off the clock when they're having those difficult conversations with customers. We need to be trusting them with their judgments, trusting them with their gut instinct. They are having those conversations with the customer. They're hearing it directly. They're the ones that get a feel for actually what that customer needs, and they can get, sometimes you get that gut instinct that actually something's not quite right. So trust your frontline staff when they have that gut instinct and they come to you to sort of say, actually, do you know what, if that's what you believe, I'm going to trust your judgment, and then let's see how we can adapt and meet that customer's needs. The next E, they all happen to be E's. The next E is all about the environment. It's all about creating an environment where it's safe, it's open, it's transparent. Staff feel supported. And again, through the FCA guidance, they talk about offering practical and emotional support for staff. They are dealing with these difficult, challenging conversations in their own homes, and they are potentially facing vulnerable circumstances and situations too. So it's all about creating that safe environment where staff feel trusted, valued, nurtured, cared for, and then ultimately you will reap the benefits because your staff will go above and beyond for both the customers and for the organisation. And the last E I wanted to share was the skill that we should all be recruiting for. This is now the skill that we need to be looking for in our staff, emotional intelligence. And what I wanted to just finish off sharing with you today is just 4 of the key skills that are going to really help to embed that vulnerability mindset. Listening. I cannot emphasize enough how important listening is. It's the greatest skill that you can ever develop, both personally and in your teams. And I think what we need to be mindful of when we're having conversations with potentially vulnerable customers is we need to be listening to understand, not listening to reply. And I think sometimes that's often what we do. Whilst the other person is talking, we're actually thinking about what we're going to say, how we're going to respond, how we're going to solve the problem. Sometimes we need to take a step back and just actually, I'm just going to listen. And then I'll take my time and then I will respond. So absolutely key. And then very close to that is empathy. It's actually thinking about how that situation is impacting that individual. How would you feel if you were in that situation? And how would you want to be treated, spoken to, communicated with if you were in that situation? So again, it's building those skills in your team. So yes, train on vulnerability, but also train on these soft skills. These, they're not really soft skills, they're actually powerful skills, but these are the skills that are actually going to make a difference to your customers and to your staff. Another key skill is accountability. It's making sure that individuals are accountable. They take ownership, they take responsibility for their decisions, their thoughts, their actions. And this is very much prevalent in people who are highly emotionally intelligent. And they are accountable. They take full responsibility for everything that they say they're going to do. And that's what we need with our frontline staff when they're dealing with customers who are potentially vulnerable, is actually taking ownership. How can I adapt? How can I meet their needs? How can I really improve this customer experience for the customer due to my actions? And then the last one I want to share with you is continuous improvement. And I think we can look at this from both an individual point of view and also from an organizational point of view. We need to be continually improving daily, getting better, getting stronger, developing these skills, getting feedback from people, asking for feedback. How are we doing? How can I improve? How can I do it better? And what can we do better to make this experience better for you? So again, sort of encourage that mindset that, people who want to make a difference are continually learning. So create opportunities where people can learn, can ask for feedback, can take on that feedback. They can have mentors, they can have coaches. So it's all about creating that vulnerability mindset. I know it's been a whistle-stop tour. It's difficult to get everything I want to share with you into 10 minutes, but I hope that has been helpful, and really want to encourage you to just talk about vulnerability, talk about customers, talk about situations and experiences on a daily basis. Get people comfortable being uncomfortable talking about vulnerability, because I think that's the only way we're going to change the approach that we have to vulnerability. So thank you very much for listening, and over to you for any questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. Especially resonated with me was the part where you said about listening. I think because of particularly my background working within complaints, you're so sort of keen to get to the crux of the issue. You want to offer them advice, you stop listening at one point. So yeah, that does make sense. You need to sort of take a step back and fully absorb that information. So yeah, that really resonated with me.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Anthony Price. So Helen, this is absolute music to my ears. This is what we should all be doing to support vulnerable customers. Listen to understand, not listen to respond. What a wonderful phrase. So not a question, just a brilliant comment for you.
I won't take claim to that, because it is actually Stephen Covey's quote I have actually stolen, so I should give him the credit for that. So definitely look it up and type it out and put it up. It's a great quote.
Brilliant. So we've had a question from Louise. So please, can you suggest or recommend any specific training courses or information resources?
Well, obviously, predominantly, I would say me, because I am obviously a vulnerability training provider. But I think there are so many different, you know, the charities, approach charities as well. If you really do have, if you have identified the vulnerabilities that are prevalent in your customer base. So if you have a higher, an older customer base, and maybe dementia is very much a sort of a common vulnerability within your customer base, then approach the Alzheimer's, you know, get them involved, get everyone dementia friends, so that they can pick up on those cues. Definitely, I'm going to be taking part and completing mental health first aid training in April. I've finally got around to booking onto it. I've been so busy. So again, then there's so many different courses you can do. You know, be aware of fraud and scams. You know, I'm a friend against scams. You know, there's bereavement training. You know, all of these charities offer some amazing you know, training courses. You know, there's some free ones and there's ones that you have to pay. I think everyone should also have suicide prevention training. And there's a great one with Zero Alliance Suicide Organisation. That's a free half-hour online course as a starting point to just get the thought process going of actually how you can start that conversation. So yeah, it's a whole bank there, sorry.
That's okay. So we've got one more for Delia. At the start of the conversation, are there any key phrases that will make a person more likely to respond openly?
Yes, I think this is one thing that I do bring up in my question. Open questions are very, very powerful. And I think the most powerful one, especially when somebody has disclosed something with you, a situation or a circumstance, rather than say, oh, okay, thanks for sharing that, let's get on with what we're doing, take a step back and just say, actually, thank you for sharing that with me. How does that impact you? How is that impacting you? How do you foresee that it's going to impact you? I had a conversation yesterday with a loan provider organisation, and obviously you've got a short duration of a loan, 3-year loan. You know, if somebody's sharing something with you, you know, think about how it's impacting them now, but actually how is it going to impact you through the duration of the loan period? You know, what do you need from us that's, you know, going to help you with that?
Brilliant, thanks, Helen. One more from Lee, from Money and Pensions. Is there anything specific in interpreting written communications for those not keen to talk on the phone or who are digitally excluded? Yeah,
definitely. I think grammar, spelling, keywords and phrases that they use. I think that's it. Sometimes it can be quite obvious if maybe English isn't their first language. Also, as well, if they've put in something in through the post, look at actually what they've written on. Is it the back of a cigarette packet or is it actually a proper piece of paper? Sort of looking at the type of writing. Is it joined up? Is it not joined up? Actually, you can tell it. You can tell a huge amount from somebody by their written content. So I mean that's just a few things there that you can take away, but it is powerful actually to sort of see somebody's written content, and even in emails, you know, have they got the niceties at the, you know, the good morning Helen, you know, kind regards, you know, or is it just straight to the point? Is it, you know, are they clear and concise, or are they kind of going around the houses? So it's kind of, you can pick up a huge amount from written content. So hope that helps as well.
Lovely. There's another one that's come in from Danielle from Central Trust. Is there any advice you could provide to prevent the collections agent from sounding robotic when speaking to vulnerable clients?
Yes, pausing. Cannot emphasize enough the power of pausing, because I think sometimes we get so focused in what we're trying to achieve, but actually just by taking a pause, taking a step back, catching your breath, catching your thoughts, and sometimes even just thinking, you know, actually, am I just being me? Sometimes you just want to be authentically you. And I think, again, that may be what we need to be encouraging with our staff as well. Personally, I don't like scripts, but I know that they have their place. But I think maybe even encourage frontline staff to maybe adapt the script that best fits them and their tone of voice and their personality. You know, give them key words that they need to say, but actually maybe encourage them to write their own script so it doesn't sound robotic.
Lovely, thanks, Helen. There's one that's come in from Ian Phillips. In order to help our colleagues find the needle in the haystack, the FCA says firms should have a clear view of which vulnerabilities they're likely to come across. You've just talked about what you can do once you know, for example, engaging Alzheimer's. But how do you find out which ones are the most important in the first place?
I think it's a case of two elements, really. I think having the conversations with the customers to find out what they might be experiencing, and actually again looking at the data. I think data comes up quite a lot in vulnerability and conversations, and also as well maybe even looking at complaints data as well, looking at root cause analysis. Why are people complaining? Is there a communication barrier? Is there lack of empathy with the staff? Are people not taking time to explain things? So again, just sort of looking at all the different things that you can within the organisation to really highlight what might be prevalent in your customer base. And I think that's really sort of the key way. I think ultimately just having the conversation with customers and frontline staff to find out.
We'll do one more, so which is one that I think you've already answered. Helen, can you remind me of the name of the company that offered the suicide prevention course online for free?
Yes, of course. Zero Alliance Suicide. When the next person takes over from talking, what I'll do is I'll find it on Google and then pop it in the chat box for everybody. I'll find the link for you all.
Lovely, thank you so much, Helen. We weren't able to cover off Kevin Steele's questions. So Kevin, are you with us now?
I am.
You are? Okay, sure. I'll just go through the chat and see what questions that you had. Apologies.
Didn't notice too many.
There was a couple.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have one from Carolyn. So where does breathing space best fit in the customer journey, i.e. what should be the trigger to initiate it?
Well, depending on whether this is going to come creditor initiated. So I think what we looked at earlier on was situations where I think a creditor will come across somebody, you know, and I think IE Hub discussed this with multiple debts where somebody is in serious financial difficulty without them necessarily having gone through a full assessment, but you know, clearly there are affordability issues. I would suggest that signposting process, dynamic signposting, whether that be a hotkey or something similar, is critical at that point. I think also IE Hub just identified even within their own process there will be triggers within it where looking at breathing space may be an option for somebody when they start looking at the outcome of that budget production. So more intelligence that there is in that front end process, the better. Whether they want to use a debtor advisor at that point is another matter. But I think having that comfort and trust with the debt advisor to do part of that assessment, I think is key. Now, the guidance that they've given to debt advisors is that you shouldn't necessarily have to produce a full SFS immediately, but I sort of feel it goes hand in glove. Certainly in my experience in the commercial sector, you are trying to engage with the customer as fully as you can do, as early as you can do, to get a full flavour. First of all, is whether you can help, because most commercial firms now have very clear signposting policies if they are going to refer to somebody else or a specialist agency. So getting that full picture, I think, is pretty key very early on. Whether many consumers are going to do and engage this directly themselves, whether that be off the back of something like the Money and Pension Service site or some of their PACE partners, remains to be seen, because as I said, I think that awareness is a real problem. So I think we have to rely on creditors actually signposting in, whether that be into the big debt charities or some of the niche players. And there are many, many niche players, particularly when we get into the mental capacity space.
Lovely, thank you, Kevin. I saw in the chat earlier that we had some inquiries regarding explicit consent. Chris Fitch has had to leave us, unfortunately, but Ian Phillips, are you with us?
I am.
You are. Did you want to sort of impart any information? Like I've seen that you've put in the chat a little bit of information that you wanted to share with everybody.
Yeah, so I'll try and be the Luke Skywalker to Chris's Obi-Wan Kenobi, seeing as he's had to leave us. But yeah, I think it was just around, there was a view expressed, I think, a well-intentioned one, I'm sure, that the only way to process information on a vulnerable customer is through explicit consent. And I think I just wanted to highlight that probably the thinking on that has moved on a little bit. The Money Advice Trust and Money Advice Liaison Group have done quite a bit of work around it. And there are some useful guides that have been produced and have been subject to legal advice, I should point out as well, which I put the link to those in the chat. Let's not get into a whole session about it because we could run a day's workshop just on this point. But I think the key thing is not to think that explicit consent is the only route. It certainly is a route, but one of the key things is that once you go down the explicit consent route, if the customer declines it, you then can't go any further. So you need to think really carefully before you go down that route as to whether there are any other bases, such as legitimate interest, where a firm needs that information. So Helen mentioned just now non-English speaking customers. For a lot of firms, recording the fact that a customer doesn't speak English will be essential to them providing the product or service they're providing. So they have a legitimate interest in being able to capture that information. But I think the key thing is don't think that explicit consent is the only route. It may not even be the right route if you can get it sometimes. So have a look at the guides. They're free to use, publicly available, and that will help point you in the right direction.
Thanks, it's Helen here. Thanks, Ian. I mean, I think we are still seeing data protection as a big barrier. It's a perceived barrier in certain cases. So I think I think maybe we'll perhaps pick it up in a future session. I think it would be really valuable to do that. I mean, what we do in terms of in VRS with our subflags, some of those, I mean, Peter on the sort of sensitive special categories of data. So they are driven by explicit consent, absolutely. But I think thanks for that, Ian. I think it is worth batting back because we are still getting can't share data because of data protection. End of. So it'd be nice to work on it a bit more.
Yeah,
that's lovely. Thank you so much, and thank you very much to all our speakers that we've had today. So I'm just going to do my reflections of the day for you guys now. So we had Helen Lord from the VRS speaking about data sharing and helping organisations to identify customers in vulnerable circumstances. Chris Fitch on the barriers to customer disclosure and creating a disclosure environment. Josh from SLL Capital on the customer's needs and how to assess them and how to handle them correctly. Kevin, obviously, on the impact of breathing space for companies and people. Mark, thank you for helping us to understand working with partners to put customers more in control of their financial situations. And Helen Pettifer on learning and understanding vulnerability, particularly with regards to listening, empathy, accountability, and continual improvement. Yeah, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's registered to come today and everyone that did show up. We will be sharing the recording today on our website, which I will be sending you through emails on how to access on our website. All presentations will be shared apart from Chris Fitch's, because that's not quite to the standard he'd like it to be before it's shared, but he has given me a really helpful guide that sort of encompasses what he was speaking about today. So I will be sharing that with you guys as well, which should hopefully be available on our public website. So as soon as that's available, I will be sharing that with you all. But yeah, so that's the end of the session today. Thank you again so much. Please do get in touch if you've got any questions. I did put mine and Helen's emails in the chat, but obviously you've already got my email from sending through the instructions today. Please keep in touch and hope to see you at future sessions.